Hey everybody, Greg Casillo from Casillo.com. I have Kathy here with me today, and she has a ton of questions that I figured, you know what, we just need to record it, make a video that I really think you guys are going to enjoy, and there are a lot of them, so we might be here for a little while. So, Kathy, tell us a little bit about, or tell everybody a little bit about how you got into photography, what you enjoy the most, and what your kind of favorite are. Same with equipment. What do you have in equipment?
Okay, I've been taking pictures for years, mainly of my kids. I was a big scrapbooker and took a lot of pictures of mainly my kids' sports stuff, and I took more and more pictures and would post them on a free site for the parents, and over I got the response, you really need to be doing this. Mm-hmm. So I was shooting in auto. I had a nice Nikon D50.
No, not auto.
But I was shooting in auto until you reformed me, showed me the error of my ways. And when I decided that I wanted to do something more with this, I bought a Nikon D7000 and a lovely, wonderful 70 to 200 2.8 at your advice, VR2. And love it, but it's really my only great lens. Mm-hmm. Love the camera, love the lens, want to continue to grow, and that's why you've been helping me. Okay,
sounds good. Now, what else besides the sports have you had trouble with, or are you trying to get into? Have you really found your, do you think you found your niche or not?
My niche is mainly the kids' sports. I shot a kids' football game the other day, which was a lot of fun, and families and kids. And I don't really have any desire to do weddings and any of those big things, but I've done some headshots on the people asking me to do so. Not my favorite, but I'll certainly do it.
Okay. Well, if you're trying to make a business out of it, which I believe you are, right? Yes. Then that's obviously a requirement for you to be able to do those other things.
Right.
So let's start on our list and tell me where we're at, and we'll get going.
My big thing is getting sharpness. Okay. I want things crystal clear, popping off the page, the.
That's a good thing.
It is, but I never. Well, not never, but I don't get it as crystal clear as I want to a lot of the time. Okay. So the one picture that I was showing you was of my niece. Okay. Some engagement pictures. So I like the color. I like the setting.
Now, was it, where did you focus? Tell me where you focused in that image.
I thought I was focusing on their faces, or trying to get the two faces in focus. Okay. Is another question that I have. I was shooting with my 70 to 200. The aperture was 2.8. Focal length was 130 millimeters. Shutter 1/125th ISO at 200. Okay.
A couple things that I would do different. Number one would be you're not going to be able to shoot at 2.8 with something like that when they're so far away. Okay. You're automatically going to have to go to f4. Okay. When you have two people, if they're on the same plane and both heads are right next to one another, you're going to be okay. You'll be able to make it. But when one is behind another, there's just no way that you're going to be able to have the two of them on different planes, even when using the rule of the 1/3 2/3 rule of focus, which means that you would focus 1/3 of the way into the image, and then 2/3 your focus is behind and 1/3 is in front. So in that case, you could help it a little bit by, say, focusing on her hair or maybe her shoulder area right here, down a little lower, and obviously bringing him closer is also going to help. Okay. All right. When you're using your camera, I'm not 100% familiar with that, but you can choose just a single point on the D7000, right?
That's what I usually use.
Okay, you're just using the single, you're not using the dynamic area?
No.
Okay, and that's what you want then. So F4, choosing that single point, keeping them close together is obviously going to help. Now, the next thing that I would say in this image is, instead of being at 130 millimeters, back up a few more feet. Okay. Since you're already shooting at 2.8 to blur the background, back up a little bit farther. Okay. So that you're going to blur the background even more when you zoom in more. Okay. Okay. When you zoom in more, you're going to end up with a blurrier background. Right. Okay. More separation means that they're going to be isolated a lot more. Okay. Okay.
What about shutter speed?
Shutter speed, as I showed you in the class, and actually this is a video that I need to make for everybody, is to talk about what my base exposure, like I taught in the class, was. To be at your maximum aperture at 200th of a second always, and then just up and down with your ISO. So that 200th of a second is good for kids moving. It's good for using a long lens so that you didn't have any problems with camera shake.
Right.
And so those are the main things.
So pretty much always keep it over 1/200th?
When you're shooting with your 70 to 200, you really should.
And is that related to the length of the lens?
Yes. What happens is your movements are magnified a lot as you're zoomed in more.
Right.
Okay, so the more you're zoomed in, the more any of your movements or problems are going to be magnified. That's the last thing that you want.
Right.
All right, so.
Now is that, I had read somewhere, I think that there's a formula for that. If you're shooting with certain length lenses, there's a formula for how low you can handhold.
The rule of thumb is that I've always heard is to keep it above the focal length of your lens.
The longest focal length?
Yes.
Okay.
So if you're at, if you have a 300 millimeter lens, then it should be above 300.
Okay.
If you have a 200 millimeter lens, it should be above 200. That's kind of the rule of thumb. Now, obviously, especially with the newer VR, yes, you can handhold, but you're better off to be 100% sure, in my opinion, with the great high ISOs in the cameras. Not worried about it.
Well, it's frustrating to get that close and to like the shot, but then have it be too soft.
Yep.
It makes me crazy.
Yep. So it could be a slight lens thing, but I seriously doubt it. And if it is a consistent problem, then just send the equipment in and get it checked.
It's a brand new lens.
Yeah. I mean, that doesn't mean anything either.
Okay.
So just send it in and get it checked.
What about calibration?
Same thing. If you have problems with it, just send it in and get it checked.
Okay. So you don't recommend trying to self-calibrate?
If you really, really need it, yes. Or if you're doing a lot of detail work, if you're doing images that require absolute pinpoint 100% accuracy, like if you were doing scientific kind of work, yes.
Okay.
But for portraits, for sports, for anything like that, no. It's probably user error, most likely. Okay. So just work on it, and that would be my guess.
Yeah.
All right.
For tripods, do you recommend using a tripod for something like that? I don't like being tied down.
I've never been a fan of using a tripod.
Okay.
For anything, especially for a smaller couple or a smaller group, never been a fan.
Okay.
I like having, say, a tripod on a bigger group, or if it's a studio shoot, like a video like we're doing right now, got to have a tripod.
Right.
It's not going to be steady. Right. Or if we had a big group of 10 or 15 people, yes, then I'll do that. Or last week I was working on shooting some interiors in kitchens, and that was a huge help to have a tripod. Yeah. But for the most part, no.
How about a remote trigger, shutter, whatever that's called?
If I need to be in it, sometimes. But that's about the only time that I'll use it.
Okay.
That's it.
All right.
I have one. It's in one of my bags somewhere, but I don't use it.
You'd have to dig it out.
Yeah.
All right. With sports, I'm fine shooting baseball and things where there isn't constant motion. And when there is motion, I can get the shot some of the times. But it's so frustrating when I have a runner coming into home base and I'm trying to follow him in, and sometimes it's following in on an angle. So you're not just following in on the same plane. So panning is difficult. How do you get those shots sharp?
Where would you be standing in that particular instance? Are you standing on the first baseline and they're running the third?
Usually there's a fence, so you can't stand exactly where you want to be standing. Okay. So you're standing at an angle, or you can stand sometimes down the third baseline and you've got someone coming straight at you. But I don't have a whole lot of success with the continuous focus. I just don't like it.
That is one time that you're going to need to switch to the dynamic area AF, which is the one that will pick a point around the outside, so that if the subject did move a little bit out of the normal frame, that it's going to follow them a little bit, and you might have to experiment with that. And then the wide area one, which lets the camera completely pick everything at once. I'm not a fan of that. I haven't used it a lot.
I've played with it and I just don't have a whole lot of success. Maybe I just have to play some more with it.
Sometimes it is, but it also could be the limitations of the body.
Okay.
Because you know, the 70 to 200 is a big lens. You know, you're going to have that lens for 10 years. You know, you're going to use it forever. But the problem with it is that it might have some limitations on that D7000 body.
Okay.
So my suggestion would be to either try someone else's body with that lens in that same situation.
You volunteer?
See, I don't know about that. Rental. Borrow lenses. You know, that's one of those. So to try someone else's equipment in that same situation, or to try a different lens, or try something that's a little bit different and see if it's actually helping.
So is that, when you say body, is that the speed of my processing, like with the
yeah,
stuff?
it may only be focusing so fast.
Okay.
And if you know, obviously you're in continuous, so it should be able to follow the runner.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that unfortunately that people always, especially when the D7000 first came out, they said to me, well, you know, I'm just going to buy this camera because it's $1,200 and it's a great camera, it's brand new. Okay. But you know what? You might need the AF power of the D300, 300S, D700.
So they focus faster
Yes.
than my D7?
Yes. Especially when subjects are moving, yes, okay. That's a big difference. You're probably not going to notice it for your standard shot, you know, your standard portrait like you had.
Yeah.
But for sports and stuff, you're going to notice it. That's why those guys have the top of the line bodies, because they focus, and their AF speed and their tracking speed is so much better.
Yeah. And experience has helped, because even switching from auto to manual, you have so much more control. And learning when the shot's coming, learning where to position your focus. Today I was shooting my son pitching, and now you tell me whether this is right or not, but if I use my single focus, I know you're not a fan of recomposing, but if I focus and then recompose just a little bit out where I know he's going to be, because I want to catch the ball leaving his hand, but if I focus back on where he is when he starts the pitch, it's not where he ends up. So if I can refocus and wait for where that's going to be, how do you...
You can, but the other thing you need to be cognizant of is being able to move that point and practice moving that focus point.
But can you move the focus point in the middle of a pitch and fire?
No, not in the middle, but, you know...
Well, I do.
You can anticipate a little bit.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Anticipate.
But if I move the focus point, won't it focus on nothingness? Like there's nobody there. It might move over to the first baseman. You know what I'm trying to say?
Not exactly, but my point...
nothing to focus on.
Yeah, my point is to just be good with moving it and fast with moving it.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm still a little confused though. Like if there's going to be motion and there's nothing, if he's...
Well, your motion isn't focus related. You know, even if the pitcher is moving, you're on a continuous focus. The pitcher's throwing their pitch.
But the focus is going to be beyond where he was when I originally focused.
But you're still on continuous.
Oh, I wasn't though.
Yeah, you're still on continuous because he's moving.
Right, I wasn't putting it on.
He's taking a step forward. He's coming towards you. So
I don't
yes.
know that the camera's fast enough to click to get that though.
I don't. You know, I'm gonna have to really do some tests to see if that's the case and what's going on.
Yeah.
To see if I can figure it out.
More user error. Do you ever use the AE or AF lock, and what is that all about?
Well, you mean the little button on the back?
Yes.
Okay, the one that your thumb in the top and the back?
That mine has never touched, yes.
Rarely, very rarely. The one time I do use it all the time is on the D3S, because I use it for focusing when I'm doing video.
Okay.
But it's very, very rare, because realistically the AE lock and AF lock are built into the shutter button.
Okay.
And like we were talking about before with moving focus points,
right,
my finger is always on that multi-selector to be able to move my focus points inside of the camera. Okay. So I'm much more worried about focus, because I know that I can take my camera and tilt it down. Say I didn't want the sky in a picture.
Right.
It was too bright. Okay, and I wanted a meter just on everything down here. Okay, so I take the camera and I tilt it down a little bit, figure out what my exposure is, or hold the button down halfway. You know what I mean? That's the main thing, is if you needed to have AE separate from AF.
Okay.
Okay, so if your exposure, if you need to calculate your exposure separate from your focus, because when you recompose, your focus is obviously going to be off. That's the one time when you're going to need to use it, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
So if there's a shot where you need to have your you have to use an automatic exposure, and then your focus is going to be different from that recomposition. Okay, from that calculating. That's going to be the time you're going to use it. But other than that, it seems like you're a little confused.
I'm going to have to like watch the video a couple times because that was a lot of stuff in there.
So in other words, you're changing your exposure by taking the sky out of the picture. In other words, you're recomposing the shot.
It's going to throw your
exactly. So you're just tilting the camera down slightly.
Right.
But you can't get your exposure by pushing down the shutter at the same time because you're also going to focus.
Okay.
Okay. So you would have to then hold the exposure lock.
Freeze your exposure.
Yes, and then recompose and get your.
Okay.
So that's why they have both.
Okay.
That's why they have both. If you're in that situation where you need it.
What is the situation where you might need it?
To me, none. Because I'd rather just shoot manual exposure.
Okay. Which is what I do most of the time anyway.
Yeah, it makes a lot more sense just to switch, to me anyway, and that's the way I shoot all the time anyway. Just switch over to manual exposure, not worry about it.
That's easy. And along that same line, up until recently, I was confused between metering and focusing because they both have a little spot, you know, versus the matrix and the spot. And so I was thinking spot was the same. So you might want to explain that a little bit.
Well, yeah, your spot metering is just I think it can set in most cameras too, from like 2% up to like 10%,
right?
Something like that. So that's just the meter off of a spot, and I very rarely use that.
Okay.
And that's usually right in the center.
Right.
But then the focus point allows you to move the little red box typically around the viewfinder. And it would be good
when you put this into production to show people like me, because I remember you talked about it recently, I think in one of your videos.
Yep.
And I listened and I still confused what the spot was, because in the camera, when you look at the spot focusing, it's a spot, and when you look at the metering, it's a spot. So
it is.
I was thinking it was.
It can be. It can be difficult.
So if you see a picture of it, that kind of clarifies it in your mind.
Cool.
Again, quick. We already talked about the quick focusing. White balance. Auto white balance works sometimes for me, especially with baseball. I'm having trouble with all this color on the fields. Somehow the pictures come out looking kind of, I think, yellowy, and I might be able to find some on here, but you can maybe start addressing some of that. I just don't always like the auto balance. Okay.
Well, number one, you should be shooting raw for everything, right?
I am.
Okay. Well, that's good.
Hey, I follow directions.
That's good.
You yelled at us.
So you're shooting raw for everything, so that's good. And that's a fine white balance. There's nothing wrong with that.
You think that's okay?
Maybe it's just a touch blue. Obviously, you can't really tell 100% because it's going to be the screen.
Yeah.
You know, each screen and lighting and this and that are all going to be different. But that looks fine to me.
Okay.
But the picture you showed me earlier with the couple, that was too cool. That was too cold to me. It needs to be just a little bit warmer.
Okay.
So auto, to me, it's going to get you close.
Right.
But it's very rarely going to be perfect.
Okay.
Okay. So you're still going to need to adjust it a little bit in post. And that could be as easy as selecting, if it's sports, 30, 50, 100 pictures. Select all of them, apply that custom white balance, maybe change it over to a daylight setting or a cloudy setting so that it's just a little bit warmer, or just drag the slider over a little bit so that it warms up all those photos at one time, where you get one and then you sync the rest. So it's not like you need to do them individually unless they're in completely different lighting situations.
Yeah.
But you still want to try and keep them consistent.
Well, I'll find that sometimes we're talking about Little League, so the games are like 2 hours long. And sometimes even then we have to call the time cutoff. But from the beginning to the end, it'll change. Your lighting situation changes. So sometimes in the beginning, I think the pictures look fine, and by the end, I'm just using auto white. How about with in Lightroom? One of the things that's really nice is the boys at this age sometimes have gray pants, and I can use that little eyedropper. And if I use that with the gray, that will sometimes work for me too.
It'll help. Yeah, it'll help. Sometimes it's still going to be a little bit off. Okay, but you can definitely try that. That's usually a good starting point. Is what I tell most people. It's a good starting point to start there and then maybe adjust from there. But I still err on the side of warmth.
Yes.
In that particular
image.
About
you.
Yeah.
What about gray cards?
For something like this, you can't shoot a gray card at sports.
What about portraits?
I don't waste my time on doing it then either. If the only time I will is when I'm in the studio. Okay. Like I had a portrait on Thursday, and we were in the studio, controlled situation, controlled lighting, and then, yes, I almost always shoot a gray card then.
Okay.
But I will very, very rarely do it in any other situation, unless it's product photography where I have to have a perfect color or a perfect, say I'm shooting clothing or something like that. I need to have perfect color to know that I'm 100% on. Then I'll use a gray card or a Gray Tag Macbeth card with all the different color patches on it. And so either that's when it's really important.
And when you use the gray card, how do you use that in your editing?
You'll just shoot one photo, and then you'll have all the different patches, and the main patches that you have are the gray ones at the bottom. It starts with white and goes to black.
Right.
And there's 5 or 6 on the bottom.
Okay.
You take that eyedropper and drop on the second patch, the second lightest patch, not the white one.
Okay.
The second lightest patch is the one you want to drop on, and choose that, and that's how you're going to balance. And then sync that to all of your other images. All your
other images. Speaking of that kind of stuff, when you pull your pictures into Lightroom, when I first do that, every time I'm like, ah, because they don't look sharp. Would you do anything as an auto set or a preset when you bring all of your stuff in? Is there something that you always do?
No.
Okay.
Well, just let me rephrase that. Just my metadata. Just my information, just, you know, the address, name, you know, that kind of thing. Just metadata. Anything else? No.
No.
No, everything else is normal. Sometimes I'll apply an auto, not auto tone, geez, all of a sudden I forget what it's called. The curves, the higher contrast curve setting.
Okay.
Sometimes I'll apply that, because I do like a pretty contrasty image.
I do too.
But that's about the only thing that I'll apply to everything.
Everything. Yeah. All right. When you edit, do you edit with your screen all the way up? Lighting.
Brightness? Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, but I also calibrate my screens.
That's something else you need to tell me about.
Well, calibrating your screens to me is, if you're not doing it, you're just flying blind. Because you don't know if your white balance is right, you don't know if your brightness is right, you don't know if your exposure is right. You don't know what's going on.
So how do you do it?
Well, it's a little complex, but at the same time it's super easy. The complexity is that you need to calibrate a lot.
Okay.
Because the lighting, what's happening is the lighting in the room is changing. Okay.
Right.
So at 2 o'clock in the afternoon you have sunlight coming in. All right, so the light and the temperature of that light in the room is going to be different at that time of the day versus, say, 7 o'clock at night when it's dark out.
Right.
Okay, so if you're going to edit photos at 2 o'clock, you need to calibrate. If you're editing photos at 7 o'clock again that same day, you need to calibrate again.
Okay.
Okay?
So how do you calibrate?
How do you calibrate? Just buy a calibrating tool. They're $200, $300. I have one from I1, which is a nice little device. You pop it on the screen, you run the program, and it'll just calibrate it away, and it'll set it for you, and you're done.
So
it's actually is easy.
What does that mean?
You stick it on the screen.
Really?
Yeah, you stick it right on the screen. It'll run a sequence of colors control colors, and it'll measure them. And it's also measuring the good ones will also measure the ambient light temperature in the room.
Excellent.
So not only are you doing the screen, you're also doing the light temperature in the room.
Okay.
So it'll adjust them. The other great thing is if you have multiple screens, it'll make them all even.
Right.
I have 3 screens, and they're all slightly different.
Right.
But it keeps them all even between the 3 because they're all known.
How often over the course of the day, if you're editing all afternoon into late night, how often should you be calibrating?
Typically, you should be doing it maybe every 2 hours.
That was my guess.
Yeah, probably every 2 hours unless the light's changing a lot. But then again, if you're not really adjusting a lot of color, you really only need to adjust your white balance once, then maybe after that you're just cropping and sorting and stuff like that. So then you probably wouldn't need to be. But the stuff that's important, the color stuff, is when you really need to be adjusting and recalibrating on a regular basis. Yeah.
Speaking of color, I recently shot my niece's soccer game, and their uniforms are neon yellow green.
Yep.
With the screen light all the way up. I was almost blind by the time I was finished. And I found that they were just glowing on the screen. Do you have any recommendations for editing pictures like that?
You're going to probably, were they of normal exposure? How was your histogram?
Yeah, they were well exposed.
They were fine?
Yeah. But it's just the color is...
It's just... Yeah, just the way it is.
Okay.
The camera is made to pick it up and keep it vibrant.
Color. Yeah.
And that's just the way it's going to be.
Yeah. I was blind by the time.
I mean, you probably could adjust it down if you needed to.
Yeah.
In the color, in the HSL panel, you can pick a color, use a little color dropper, color picker, and just drag that single color down. If you wanted to desaturate it or bring its brightness down or luminance up and down, you can if you really needed to. Just like the video that I did on adjusting the sky.
Yes.
Same idea.
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
I did see that video, but I was trying to just desaturate with the sliders instead of the dropper.
Well, Lightroom's smart enough to realize what colors you're working with. And sometimes you might be doing it with one color, but Lightroom's smart enough to know that you might need to adjust a couple of colors.
Right.
So that could be an issue.
Within the same panel, like within the greens, you're going to have a couple different colors.
Exactly.
Okay.
Or it could be green and a little bit of yellow.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So we might need to bring both of them down.
That color down.
Lightroom's going to know that you need to do that.
Right. I forgot about that. What is the difference between clarity and sharpening? They often look like they do something similar.
They do. Clarity is a mid-tone contrast. In other words, you have your blacks and you have your whites in the histogram, okay? And they're on the two ends.
Right.
And then you have your mid-tones that are in the middle. That's why they call it mid, okay?
You're quick.
Contrast. Your regular contrast is going to be everything. It's going to drag that entire histogram and spread it out.
Okay. Makes sense.
Now clarity is just going to spread out the middle. Okay.
All right.
Now sharpening is doing the same thing. It is adding a touch of contrast, but it's doing it where the two colors are meeting. Okay. Right. So when you're sharpening, it's where one color is hitting another, and it's adjusting and giving the tones in between those two, that line in between the two, more contrast in order to make it seem like it's sharpening the image.
Right.
So that's where you need to decide which way you want to go. Typically, I'll do a little bit of clarity, okay, and then I always apply upon export some kind of sharpening. All right, but if I feel an image needs a little bit more, that's when I'll go down to the sharpening panel in the develop module in Lightroom.
Don't touch it then generally, only on export you sharpen?
Correct. Typically I won't add a whole lot unless it's an image that I really think it needs it. Right. If it's a big portrait that I'm doing, or if it's a big say wedding print, or if it's a big landscape that I'm doing, something like that I know is going to be printed large, that's when I'll typically adjust it. But if a print is just going on the web, or if it's just going anywhere else, you're probably not going to notice it. And just apply that export sharpening, and that's it.
Because I think Lightroom naturally does 25%, don't they? Something like that, or 25. There's some 25
you can turn it off. You know what? That's a default thing,
right?
Because all images actually need to be sharpened from RAW.
Right.
So that's good. Yes, it's going to apply a little bit.
I think it's 25.
But that's nothing.
Right, but then
that's a tiny amount. 25 seems like it could be a lot, but it's actually a drop in the bucket.
And then I typically use the presets on the side and do the wide for faces one, but then I also do the sharpening on export, so I'm probably sharpening too much.
You could have to see the images to be able to tell you if you're sharpening too much. If you're seeing too many edges and too crisp, or if you're trying to fix out of focus, then you're probably too far.
All right.
If you're trying to fix something, you're doing the wrong thing, because it's made to sharpening is for enhancing, not fixing.
Right.
Okay. The unsharp mask is made to enhance, not to fix.
So that's another question. You said mask. When should I be using a mask?
What kind of a mask?
Like the
You mean the brush?
No,
the brush that's in there?
The sharpening. There's a masking thing on the sharpening sliders.
Oh, that is, actually I did a video a long time ago. I should do another one on that. And so I'll work on that. I'll make a whole nother video and go over that. Yeah, because that's kind of a difficult process. So I'll go back over that video and make a new one and update that.
Okay.
So you really need to use all three in conjunction with one another,
right.
because some things you want to be sharpened and other things you don't. So for skin, you really don't want it to be sharpened.
No,
okay.
All the little things come out. Yeah.
But eyes and lips and hair can all be sharpened okay. You know, clothing, that kind of thing can all be sharpened okay.
And is that what the masking's for? It
yeah. Sharpens some things, but not others. Yeah.
Right.
And what it's looking for is the difference in between one to another, one color and another. So skin kind of has a consistent tone, so it's not going to sharpen it as much. Whereas the, you know, you have clothing that has just different things, and it was going to realize that, hey, I need to sharpen that. So you're masking, you're telling it to get rid of some and sharpen others.
The others. That makes sense.
All right.